My name is Cameron Goebel, and I don't work for IT exactly, although I kind of do. I'm attached primarily to human resources in the EOD department, so that's employee and organizational development. Our job is to help UNM staff members bridge the potential that they have to making that potential happen in the workplace. I'm a technical training consultant. This is the only job of its kind on campus, I think. It's kind of a joint creation between HR and IT. So I do work for IT. My money comes partly out of IT. If you take advantage of my services, my time is already paid for. So don't worry about that. As a technical training consultant, part of my job is when you and IT stand up a new system, I can help develop trainings so that the staff around UNM campus can adopt those systems easily and start using them to their full potential. I'm going to be talking today about prototyping a high-quality student employee, and where that comes from is training from my particular point of view. As I mentioned before, and some of you might have heard, I got my start at UNM in IT on North Campus as a user support analyst, and I had a couple of student positions under me, and they came, they went, they came, they went. I was proud of some and disappointed in others, and we've had kind of an experience with that. So what I wanted to do was share with you the process that I've learned to go through to prototype a good student training process. So you get a new student on board, or hopefully a new batch of students on board. You have needs. You need to get them out there doing their job as fast as possible, as well as possible, and as professionally as possible. One of the main challenges to that is that training sucks. So when and I'm not going to say that I've got a great, awesome solution for anything. Really what I'm trying to do here is talk about when we see how training is falling down, let's build up some processes so that we can pick it back up again and not just rely on the same thing that isn't working, or the same thing that isn't working and then do more of that, right? So this is the point of view that I'm coming from. Training is kind of hard. The starting points when it comes to developing a new training project for me are pretty straightforward, but it comes down basically to Calvin and Hobbes, right? A swift kick in the butt. How's business? Terrible. That's hard to believe. I can't understand it. Everyone I know needs what I'm selling. So Calvin is selling a kick in the butt, and no one's buying. Can't imagine that. One of the reasons why projects fail or have a difficult time getting started is that the people behind the projects think they know what they're doing. I come from an entrepreneurial background as well as from an academic background, and that means that when I had my own business as an instructional designer with my wife, we did build up something that we knew everybody needed, but nobody wanted it, and it fell flat. So I've learned to sort of back off of my thinking, stop thinking that I know how to do something, and instead start believing that I know how to ask the right questions. So some starting points. Life is too short to build something nobody wants. Typically, if you invest everything you've got into this project because you've got this brilliant big idea and you know exactly how it's supposed to go, if you haven't checked that somebody actually wants it yet, then you've spent a large amount of your time building something nobody wants, and life is too short for that. That includes training projects. Also, as I mentioned before, my assumptions about what people want are probably wrong. As an expert in training, I have this beautiful idealized version of what training can look like, but that doesn't necessarily match with what you want. So what I'm going to do today is not tell you how to do training. What I'm going to do instead is tell you about the process that I go through to discover what training actually has to happen in your department and focus it toward the student employee situation. So we start with finding out what's real. The first thing that I do is I write my assumptions down, and this is coming from a process called the lean startup process. Has anybody heard of that? Tiny little bit? Okay, then don't worry about it. Basically, it's a way to make sure that the work that you're doing at every stage is based on something like reality, and it's not based on what your ideal version of what it should be is, because you might lead yourself down the wrong track. First thing that I usually do is write my assumptions down. I write down who my customers are. I write down the problems they might have and that they're eager to solve. I figure out kind of a proposed solution, what that might look like, what the value is behind it, what the key features are, how I'm going to reach my customers, and what the costs and ROI are. Now, this comes, as I said, from an entrepreneurial kind of background, but I found that this is very adaptable especially when you're starting up projects for a large audience or a large population. I didn't actually put this in the slide, but I'll bring this up to you. Interesting statistic, which you may know. At any given time at UNM, there are 60,000 people or so on campus, right? And what that means is that if we were to pick up UNM and drop it in the middle of the desert in New Mexico somewhere, it would instantaneously become the 4th or 5th largest town in New Mexico. Okay, so it's not, I don't think of him as President Frank, I think of him as like Mayor Frank. We have lots of different customer segments with lots of different needs, lots of different problems, different values and features that they're looking for, lots of different channels to reach out to each other as staff, students, and faculty. So by cataloging what I think my assumptions are, this gives me kind of a baseline to figure out what is it that I'm going to build. If my customers, well, I'll just move on. There's a nice diagram called the lean canvas, and what I really like about this is that it captures all of this sort of bullet point information, but it's not bulleted. It's really more kind of at a glance kind of looking. So I've got like problems that people want solved, solutions that I might have, what the value is, who my trainees and students might be, who my early adopters might be, who might take my project and run with it, how much it might cost. The idea here is that I'm looking for something at a glance. I don't want to have this huge like stack of documentation and bullet points to dig through. What I'm trying to come up with is an agile, light, kind of very descriptive plan that lets me see the relationships between who am I trying to work with and what might they want, who am I trying to work with and what are they using already with their existing alternatives. You'll see how this kind of shakes out in a bit. I just wanted to get you used to this canvassing idea rather than writing down everything you have in a very complete kind of way. You'll see how the canvas really works when it comes to developing training documentation as well. The assumptions that I had, my customers are managers and supervisors who organize or perform trainings for their student employees, particularly IT. The problem is that the training documentation is out of date and it's hard to get to. That's what I thought the problem was anyway. I know that we have really big stacks of documentation. Like we've got tons of fast infos, and there are probably like binders up on the shelf, all that kind of stuff that just kind of gets built and then sort of falls away, and maybe it's ignored or it doesn't come back to, or it's not refreshed periodically, so products change, support methods change, the training documentation goes out of date, it becomes useless. That's kind of what I thought the problem was. My solution that I thought I could sell, by sell I mean have people give me their time and energy to do the work. My solution was to create co-working meetings where IT stakeholders could collaborate and update training documentations with best information. So I thought I would go to IT managers and supervisors and say, hey, if you've got training documentation that you know is out of date, I'm going to set up a little co-working lab or something. We'll have computers, we can all sit down, we can share our practices, we can ask each other questions, we can reach across the table to each other if we need to. If nothing else, we can just put aside like an hour of our time and do the work instead of trying to carve it out somewhere and hope that we get it done before something else rolls over our schedule. So these were my assumptions. If you remember, the point is to discover what's real. So with my assumptions written down and out of my head, I then went out and started talking to IT managers and supervisors and other sort of people to get information about what they really knew and what their problems really were. The point here about forgetting about surveys and focusing on people's stories, a lot of the learning that I did took place from just sitting down and asking simple interviews. Tell me about a time that you had to train a student employee. What was that like? What went right? What went wrong? And then just sat and listened, and I usually recorded it as well, and I would go over the recording after we were done. I would always ask if I was going to do a recording, so for those of you that I have sat with at some point, I'd see like 2 of you. Don't worry, it's not like testimonial or anything. The point is that I didn't know what I didn't know yet, and people are always ready to tell you about their pains and their issues. As a training consultant, my job is to help make your pains and issues go away by leveraging training. So I needed to really understand what those were. My interview process went something like this. I would start just by arranging a little bit of time, calling up somebody and saying, hey, I'm interested in learning about what your training process is for your students. Can we sit down? And if I got a yes, then I'd take them through this interview process. I'd ask them what department and what job title they were and what relationship to training they had. 3 very simple questions. That gave me an idea of which departments I was working with most, what level of person I was at. If I was talking to more directors than I was to, user support analysts or something, then that would skew the presentation of my questions. And what relationship they had to training. Do you actually do the training? Do you oversee somebody's work who does the training? Do you develop training documentation? Is it delivered something? What? Tell me. Then we get into exploring their problem. Tell me about the last time you did a training and how did you feel about the outcome? And then I just sit and listen. As I started learning more about the story that they had, I would start asking for clarifying details. What exactly do you mean when you say this? Why is it so hard when a student leaves? Why does it seem to take so long for students to ramp up? As a trainer, again, I feel like I've got a pretty good handle on what this is, but I wanted to really know from the boots on the ground perspective, what are the problems that training really has to address? As I got an idea of the problem, I would start feeding it back to them. So I would ask questions, they would tell me, and I would say, okay, let me see if I understand your problem. And I would rephrase it back to them in their own words. So you're saying that one of the reasons that it hurts for student employees, when student employees leave, is that they've learned all these sorts of ins and outs of the system that aren't documented anywhere, and then when they leave, all of that goes with them. Is that what you're saying? Asking those kinds of questions. If I get the answer that's kind of like, well, that's sort of what I mean, then I would ask more questions and just let you talk more back to me. But if I got a yes, that is exactly it, then we can start saying, okay, we've identified a problem. If the problem is that it hurts when student employees leave because they take all this undocumented experience with them, is that something you need to solve? Would it just be nice to solve? Or is there really no need to solve it? If there's really no need to solve it, then okay, I found something that hurts, but they don't need to solve it. I don't need to spend my time building a project around that. It doesn't hurt enough. But if they say they need it solved, that's when I can start underlying it and saying, all right, now we've got something that training can start addressing. The last thing that I would ask about is the current workarounds. How do you currently deal with the problem, and how can you tell that it works? If students are walking out with their experience, how are you dealing with that right now? Well, we have them fill out some exit interviews or something. Okay, how can you tell that works? We can't really. Okay, that's a valid story. But the point behind this final question is, what are you doing to try and solve the problem already? And are you able to measure that it's making a difference? Or are you just trying something because, something must be done, this is something, so we will do it? Does that make sense? Okay, so we go through an interview process. Here are the problems that I discovered when I was talking to IT managers and supervisors. So I went through that process. Here's what I got. Supervisor perspectives. Training costs a lot of time. Not just time to sit down and actually do the training, but for supervisors in particularly, they had to spend a lot of time preparing for the training, doing the training, going out and being done with it, coming back and seeing if the student still remembered anything. It was a really big investment of time for just a one-on-one training. Supervisors are overloaded with stuff to do. Turns out UNM is a busy place. So taking the time to stop what you're doing and train sort of feels like you're just taking this huge chunk of productivity and making me spend my day with somebody who doesn't know what they're doing. That's terrible. So they're overloaded with things to do, and it's hard to carve out time. Turns out the documentation was really up to date, so my assumption was wrong. It's just that the docs were hard to use every day. So we have fast infos, and they're kind of a little hard to get at and hard to use and hard to understand. So I was kind of right in my assumption about the documentation, but I was wrong about the problem that needed to be solved. It didn't need to be upgraded. It did not need to be updated. It needed to be made easier to use. That's a whole different problem. It was hard for supervisors to focus on doing it right. So supervisors are not typically trained, training professionals. And their day-to-day activities are always I mean, you know what it's like in IT. There are 500 fires everywhere. The dean wants something. The provost has decided to launch a new initiative. Moira is losing her mind about whatever. You can't focus. So finding that time to focus on it was really, really hard, and even when they could, they weren't trained to develop training programs. So it's difficult to leverage that. They were getting inconsistent results from training. So you could take a document that was complete on how to do something. You could hand it to a student and say, here, learn this. The student would take it, read it, and do whatever. But the results were inconsistent, even though they were using the same process. So having complete documentation was a good start, but it wasn't giving consistent results. I also interviewed a number of students, and I got their perspective from this as well, because the students are the ones that we're here for in a lot of ways, right? And student employees, exactly the same thing. So they felt that training was hurried, and it felt really disconnected. It didn't hang together. It didn't always make sense. You'd be working on how to do a Pinnacle billing order 1 minute, and then you'd be talking about how to set up somebody's voicemail. Or, you know, what? How does this all happen? There's no logic to it. So they couldn't build a connected sense of training out of it. They felt like they needed professional support, like support to become professionals. They didn't feel like they were being treated like people on a job. They felt like they were being treated like cheap labor. When you go to university to get a degree, it's not to be cheap labor, right? You're entering a professional world. You're refining your field. You're becoming an academic. You're becoming an expert at something. They wanted that professional support to create a professional persona of them as a workforce candidate, someone who would be desirable, not just qualified. Students also have fast turnover, right? Students come with an expiration date. They're going to graduate eventually or leave. So we're not looking at career track people here. We're looking at folks who get in and get out when they're done. The loss of experience when they leave. Again, they would walk out with the sort of hard-to-learn stuff that was never documented or that was kind of awkward or that just came with experience. Another side of this loss of experience when they leave, too, was that it could sometimes be very difficult for them to find what to put on their resume when they left UNM. You know, can fill out Pinnacle orders is like a great skill on the job, but how does that translate to a business that doesn't use Pinnacle and yet has skills that are similar? So they weren't quite sure how to match the experience they were getting as UNM employees to what they would get as larger workforce employees. They felt like they didn't get the big picture. UNM is a vast interrelated series of cogs and tubes and any physical metaphor you want to conjure. IT is a lot of sort of siloed areas that are highly dependent on each other's work. So you can get really expert in what your department does, but if every other department is not getting what they need, then somewhere along the line the chain is going to break. How do you know what effect your work is going to have on the greater IT effort? There was also a heavy reliance on one person who knows it all, typically the supervisor, because the supervisor was the one who would do the training. The supervisor is the one who's in charge of your job. If I have a question, I'm on the phone with somebody and something weird comes up, who am I going to go to? The supervisor. Well, you know the supervisor's already harried, right? Now you've got 40 students like clamoring for answers about weird, bizarre help desk issues or whatever. The reliance on one person who knows it all made it a really easy point of failure. If that person was out, if they were in a meeting, if they were doing some other job, if they happened to be on the phone, if you couldn't catch them in the halls, I mean, lots of failure states there. So we figured out the problems. And I figured these out, again, just by sitting down and listening and trying to understand from your point of view, what's the problem? So now we have to solve the problem. I want to walk you through a perspective on how to solve a problem so that you can understand what the next stage is really about. Let's pretend for a moment that the problem that we're having is that travel time is too long, and we want to create a solution to reduce travel time. A typical way to do this, and a sort of authoritarian, handed down from on high kind of way to do this, is to take it in steps. To reduce travel time, first you invent the wheel, then you invent the axle, then you create a car shape, and then you have created a car. And for whatever reason, this car one didn't pop up, and it probably will. PowerPoint, what do you want? Okay, so you go from thing that doesn't make you go faster to more things that don't make you go faster, to more things that don't make you go faster, to you finally put it all together and you hope that it makes you go faster. Does that make sense? Okay. Here's the way that I did it, and this is part of that lean perspective. Travel time is too long, I want to go faster. What if I give you a skateboard? Does that help you go faster? Yes. Okay, not much faster, but it works. Oh, see, car. What if I give you a skateboard? Okay, now I'm going a little faster. Is that enough for you? No, I need to go faster. Travel time still takes too long. It's better, but it still takes too long. Okay, what if I give you a scooter so you can steer? And you can use your feet. Did that solve your problem? Well, no, it's better, but travel time is still taking too long. Okay, what if I build you a bicycle? I'll do the research to build a bicycle. You see what I'm doing is taking these tiny little iterative steps. This is constructing a final version from the start. This is constructing little improvements of the same kind of thing that make things a little bit better every time. So we can go from bicycle to motorcycle to car to jetpack to water, whatever. At any point along the way, the customer might just say, you know, that actually did solve my problem. The motorcycle is what I needed. The point behind this is that I only put in as much effort as I need to make the next improvement that is recognized by the person who has the problem. This is called building a minimum viable product. The idea behind the minimum viable product, again, life is too short to build something nobody wants. If I spend my time building axles, nobody wants an axle because an axle doesn't make me go faster. If I spend my time building little things that make people go faster, they want more, and they engage more, and I learn more about what they need. Maybe I build them a bicycle and they're like, guy, I only have one leg. Can you build me something else? Oh, okay, I'll build you like your recumbent bike or something. That'll work. So you can come up with better solutions by providing incrementally better solutions. And it's minimum. I don't have to leverage an entire auto factory to solve the problem when maybe all I really needed to do is just put some wheels on a board. So let's take this from the point of view of students need better training. How do we build a minimum viable product that solves the problem of students need better training? The problem here with the car metaphor is that we all know what cars do, and we all know how they work, and we all know we're familiar with that. We're not familiar with a better training program because we don't know what that looks like yet. So what would the steps involved be? I don't know. So we have to experiment. Okay? You may feel some brief discomfort. We do science! So this is an experiment report. It's based on a methodology called the lean methodology that was you might hear sometimes from process managers and stuff like that. They'll talk about how great Toyota was in the 80s because they had this wonderful experimental methodology where their workers could do things like stop the line and make a tweak and say, hey, you need to go do this. Where before you would have to fill out big forms and the management would have to approve changes in the process and that sort of stuff. That having been said, basically we're doing experiments, right? Put together a hypothesis, deploy it out there somewhere, figure out the results, and figure out what you learned. I'm going to show you the experiments that I ran for this IT student employee training process and how they led me toward what I think is a really good prototype. Experiment 0, commitment. Hypothesis. If new employee training is a valid pain, then supervisors will volunteer time to discuss a program to improve the training. Basically, I want to know that if I make the room available for everybody to step in, people are going to step in, and we're actually going to have a conversation that matters, instead of a side conversation in the hallway, or, hey, somebody said this would be great, something like that. So this is my hypothesis. If this really hurts, people are going to spend a little bit of time with me to figure out how to make it better. So I sent out an email. Hello, everyone. This is the couple of people that I felt I was really in tune with when I was doing my exploration and my learning. So this is Derek and Doug and Taylor and Jenna. I sent this to you. Vanessa, Tony, Zach, some of the people. Hello, everyone. I asked if you were interested in making a meeting, and you said yes, so now you're committed. Here's the meeting we're going to have. We're going to get together in the same room. We'll meet as allies. We'll assess our needs. We'll account for our differences. So these are people from lots of different departments. We'll agree that training should be awesome. We'll discuss where our overlap is. We'll introduce what we've each done so far, so we'll each see each other's training programs as they exist, and we'll discuss what the ideal trainings might look like in terms of the outcomes. If we can all come together in a room and have a conversation around those points, then I will know that we are on to something that's real. That got validated. I got some managers and one student employee to come in and share their existing documents across departments. So now I've got my skateboard. Yay! The person who came in was Taylor.
Oh, yeah.
So Taylor hated him. Okay, there is enough interest for people to stop what they're doing, carve out a little time, and talk among total strangers about solving this problem. Awesome. What I learned from that was that the customer-facing departments, so the customer support services and the SCOMs, responded more strongly than the internal tech teams. So I didn't get like Voice or Workstation or Windows Team or whatever, but I did get CSS and SCOMs, and that's cool because they're really customer-facing. They're sort of the professional face of IT. If you're a staff person and you call the help desk, you're probably going to talk to a student. I also learned that students can write awesomely complete documentation. So, Jenna, this is what I was talking about when I said I was going to. You would not believe how awesome this was. I just went and was talking around and like happened to wander into your room one day. And I'm like, so what's your training documentation like? And what did you do?
Pulled up our 10-page.
You pulled out this huge stack that was like, clang, here it is. Funny you should ask. We've been working on this project for weeks and weeks and weeks. And she showed me some of the most amazing how-to stuff written by students from a student perspective, a student learning perspective. They can do documentation. Really? I see. So, next experiment was the format. My hypothesis was that if better training documentation is a need, then the early adopters are going to endorse having a new format that's structured, that's usable by students, and that's pedagogically sound. All right, what I mean by that is this. Here's a pretty typical training document, right? This is one on NetID training from CSS from sometime late last year. It's basically a long narrative. You start at the beginning, and you go all the way down, and when you're done, you've made a NetID, right? Very complete, tells you everything you need to know, but hard to use. I experimented with the format based on my my experience as an instructional designer and having some other experience in like public education and things like that. I was like, okay, if you're expected to learn something from this, then we need to put this in a learning format. So I came up with a canvas. This format is a little bit different. It looks a little more complex, and that's okay. Here are the tasks. So let's say that this is a document that you would base a training off of. Here's a box that are the tasks that the new hire is going to do in the training. So scattered throughout here are things like create a new record, click save, verify your information. It's sort of scattered all through. This box collects all that scattering and puts it in one easy to find place. What am I going to do during this training? Now I know. I just look in this box instead of having to hunt through all of this. Materials that you would use. So access to the LAM system, having a fake LAM record, the fast infos that do give you the step-by-step how-to stuff, a room with a projector and a laptop. All of that, again, is buried in here somewhere, but by putting it in this Canvas format and gathering it into little boxes, now it's available at a glance. Goals and standards, touchstone concepts, things you should already know, skills you are about to learn. Then underneath here, now we have the step-by-step stuff. So even though I kind of disparage this sort of documentation, it really does have a purpose. Putting all that complete step-by-step procedure together is really important, but it's not the first thing you need to see when you're going to do a training or when you're going to learn a new system. You need to learn, like, okay, what am I going to do? What do I need to do it? How am I going to know I did it well? How does this relate to the rest of my job? Those are the things that I need to know as a trainer as well as a trainee. Does this format work? Is basically the question that I asked. It was validated. I got together with a manager, I showed him the format, walked him through the bits, and he was like, I can tell at a glance what this is for. I don't have to go reading through the whole thing. I don't have to know all the terms. I can just, that's awesome. And then he started talking to me about, well, we could put this in that box, and we could put this in that box, and maybe we could do another lesson that highlights on this concept. I didn't realize that that was kind of out on its own before, but now I can see at a glance. So, now I've got my next iteration. See where this is leading? Hopefully? Okay. So, here's what I learned. I learned that customer support services was going to be my early adopter. I had a really enthusiastic manager who really caught on to what I was doing. I'm not going to try building a training process for all of IT. I'm just going to focus on this one guy who's got enough of a vision and has enough enthusiasm that I feel like I can really work with him. I also learned that managers don't really want to be involved at this level too much. So it's not worth going to managers and directors to talk about the efficacy here. It's really worth talking to student supervisors or high-level students who are performing with other students that they support. So, problem solved. The docs are easier to use overall. That was something that I wanted to get down out of this project, and now we've got an easier to use documentation. Problem done, and I didn't even have to build a whole system. The docs were useful for the trainer and the trainee alike during shadowing. A lot of the training that happens at IT, maybe you know this, is somebody gets hired, you put them through their paperwork, you show them how to sign in, and then you say, okay, go sit with that guy, he really knows what he's doing. Listen to everything he says and everything that she does, and just absorb through osmosis. So, problem solved, problem solved. We solved the problem, everything's awesome, problem solved. I have a 3-year-old daughter and my life is not what it used to be. Okay, anybody recognize them? Peg plus cat. PBS math show. You guys got to get on the ball here, man. There's some awesome stuff going on. All right. Experiment number 2, ownership. Okay, so we've got a document format. Okay, so we've got documents. Who's going to write them? If the new format is valid, then early adopters will spend their time and talent to write their own documents in the new format, and they're going to make it their own. They're going to find things they can do with the format that they're excited about. The corollary to this hypothesis is I can be lazy and not have to work too hard on this. They're going to write all their own documentation, and that really makes sense. I mean, I might know how to format documents, but I am not the IT guy that I was. You're all the SMEs. You know the ins and outs of your systems. I can't write documentation like you can. You know more than me. So the ownership has to be on you. But if the format works, then you're going to want that format, and you're going to use it, and you're going to say, what would make this even better? This. So I gave a manager in CSS. It's Al Votera. Okay, can I just say Al? All right. I gave Al the homework of take a particular issue, like a low-hanging fruit kind of training that everybody gets, that you have the documentation for already, and put it into this format, and he did. This is something that he wrote all by his lonesome. He put it all together, and just at a glance, I can tell, yes, he knows what he's doing with the format. What's kind of cool about this is that I did have to go and do a few little revisions and tweaks here and there, but he added on a bunch of cool stuff. Like he added on this part in here called causes, which explains why things break the way they do, and he did a couple other things, and then we started generating this whole larger training out of it. That was not just, so the problem here is there's a no dial tone issue that apparently happens with phones. Like they get this call all the time over at CSS. Instead of just sitting down and talking about the dial tone issue, he actually started generating a scenario where you would take a phone in the CSS department and break it on purpose, and then have the student employee simulate a support call. So you purposefully break the phone in common ways. You don't tell the employee which way it's broken, and then you have them try and troubleshoot it over the phone. So now we have a setting up the phone part, like how do you set the phone up so that it's broken the right way, and then a procedure for doing the training. So not only does the student employee get the sort of abstract understanding, but they also get some hands-on stuff before there's an actual person who's got their phone broken and needs it fixed. Awesome. So validated. The manager used the format, created good documentation with little training from me. Right? I oriented him toward what goes in what box. I did have to do a couple little revisions, but he knows it. He also innovated some additions to the format, so there's those causes, quick checks. He even put in the escalation path in Sharewell back before the Blixer died the death it so richly deserved. He listed how do you fill out the Blixer on this particular issue, so that students wouldn't have to go guessing okay, is this what is this? I don't even know. So he gave them new ways to support their training and their understanding of how the IT systems worked. So now we've iterated another thing. And it works, and it's easier. Here's what I learned. It took him 10 minutes to write that doc. He had the how-to stuff. He really knew it up and down anyway. It took him 10 minutes to do it. No time at all. Minimum revision from me. Awesome. So, early adopters can write awesome documentations, and managers can have training ideas that are creative, hands-on, and engaging. So now the student employee is going to have an even better experience. So problem solved. Yay, okay. Next experiment. How do we scale this up? We've got one document. How do we get lots? If the format provides a desirable return on investment, then early adopters will want to generate a full scope of training in the new format. If I'm onto something, they're going to want to do more and more and more. This stands apart from a lot of projects that I've been a part of or that I've seen around, where as you go on, you want to do less and less and less, right? So instead of being like, let's just do as little as we have to and just get to the end, it's more like, no, I see where this is going. Let's take it somewhere. So I sent out another invitation to some more folks. This was just to Al. I said, hey, let's get together and map out the trainings, like skills, knowledge, and abilities that a new employee would have to have within their first week, right? Show up. How do you know you've got an awesome employee in 1 week? We're not going to build their whole career because we're iterating, right? Tiny little steps. We're just going to build the first week. What do you think? And we might even hijack an employee and try it out. When I walked into the conference room, this is what I found. They had done this all by themselves. So here's a whiteboard with all levels of student employees. New hires, USC 1s, USC 2s, and USC 3s. Each one of these little post-it notes up here is a skill or knowledge or ability that they need to train on. They did this themselves. The manager, Al, did this himself, and he even brought other people in. And other people, like, he was doing this thing in the meeting room, and other people came in, they're like, what are you doing? He's like, I'm making a skills chart for all the student employees. And they were like, really? I've got ideas, let's put those down. Does this belong here? No, this really goes here. Okay, so they're doing the work, right? I walk in and it's done. Like, I had a whole stack of Post-it notes and Sharpies and stuff, and we did it. Which is awesome. They even did the same thing for staff. So not only did they develop a student training program, they did a staff one as well for the different grades of staff. And then they started thinking, you know, since we've got this all worked out, like a new hire, the promotion process at CSS goes something like this. They hire a new student, and for 6 months, that student is expected to learn and grow to a particular point. And if they can get to that point, then they get hired on for permanence. They get the job for realsies. Then they pick up a couple extra things that they didn't have before. And they can stay as a USC 1, but eventually we want them to gain more skills and become a USC 2. And eventually we want them to gain more skills, do more complex work, take on more responsibility, and become a USC 3. So that's the skill progression. They got this great idea. A USC 1 should be able to train a new hire because they already know all this stuff. A USC 2 should be able to train a USC 1. A USC 3 should be able to train a USC 2. And this makes a lot of sense, especially for students, because they go through that churn, right? You're not in competition with the guy underneath you to keep your job for your retirement and your benefits and all of that. Instead, it's like, I might make it up to USC 3 and then I'm graduating and I'm gone. So we need to know that the USC 2s back behind that person who have another year to go are going to be able to step up into that role and take over. So now we're solving new problems, right? And they're developing this method of training where the students are training each other based on incremental differences in ability and authority and skills and stuff like that. So, validated. Early adopters created a skills, knowledge, and abilities graph for all the levels. They envisioned students training each other. So now the supervisor's not doing all the training, right? The students are all training each other. And others joined the early adopter in this work. Incremental. Does it work better? Yes, it does. Okay. Not a fully fledged training system yet. They're already seeing how they can do it with just what they have. So here's what I learned. The Canvas style format was validated. Did you notice that this canvas looks a lot like that canvas that I showed you of the new documentation? It's not bullet points and lists. It's a canvas that's easy to look at a glance. So I figured, all right, these guys love canvases. The other thing that I saw was that nothing succeeds like success. I was only working with one manager at this point. I had invited something like 10 or 20 One person took me up on it. But when that one person started succeeding, others wanted to get involved, which is awesome. So, student job roles are now clearly defined. That was a side benefit. You may be aware that students occasionally just get sort of shoved into whatever work needs to be done at the moment, and then they are forever the person who does that. Student employees are passing on their best skills, knowledge, and abilities, and momentum is growing. The students are, not among the students, but the managers are starting to say, hey, we can really make something happen here, and we want to get involved. So problem solved, okay. Experiment 4. Can the students really get involved? Up until this point, it's all been manager, supervisor guy, right? It's all been Al. How can we get the students involved in the creation of this thing? Is it possible? Let's find out. If the job roles for students and their skills, knowledge, and abilities really match, then experienced student employees who are already at UNM and really know what they're doing, they should be able to write quality training documentation for this method. Turns out this was validated too, sort of. Al put together his list of skills and divided them up among his entire student employee group and said, okay, everybody, within 2 weeks, you write this one, and you write this one, and you write this one, and you write this one. They all created their docs. They all used the format, but the quality was kind of meh. Some really had it, and some really didn't. We're not quite there yet, so we had to go back and try it again. What I learned was that the students needed training on using the format and what good quality looked like. It's not just bullet points and indentions. The Canvas is really a different kind of beast. And so giving them some more support in the outset, I think, is going to give much better results. But we did identify certain students who were really high performers, even though they'd never seen the Canvas model before. They really got it. And they're like, aha, now I have more early adopters. So we ran it again, gave them a little more support, picked out those high performers, and they created high-quality documents. They even trained other students on the Pinnacle process. Now, I don't know if you know about, there's sort of a teeth-grinding terror of Pinnacle among students because it's so important, right? If you get one Pinnacle thing wrong when you're putting in an order, you're going to cause so much hassle for everybody around you, and they're all going to look at you, and they're going to be like mean at you and stuff like that. So Pinnacle was a really nice process to train on. People were scared of it. They didn't want to try it out. They had this reputation of being this terrifying monster. We built a Pinnacle training document. The students trained other students on it, and those students who were trained on it were like, what's the big deal? Yeah, we can do this. Like, yeah, it's detailed, but we can do it. Okay. So, ding! Iteration worked. Awesome. They loved it. They really enjoyed it. When the students trained each other, they were actually up at the front desk in the CSS building over by physics and astronomy. They were just up in the front desk. Like, there were 4 of them there. One of the students had the training doc, and he was like, guys, come here, let me show you something. And then, okay, you guys go make your own Pinnacle orders, and then we'll make sure that it worked. And they did it. The end. It was awesome. They didn't have to go to a classroom. They didn't have to schedule a bunch of time. It was just something they could do in the 10 minutes or so that they had between calls. Awesome. So, problem solved. Supervisors were freed up from their time, and they still get good training docs. A supervisor didn't have to train 4 separate people on Pinnacle. One student trained 3 others, and they all got it. Students are being recognized for their expertise. Aha, now you're being treated like a professional. You're not just cheap labor. Now you're actually like contributing and stuff. Training was also directly relevant to how students work and learn. So it's not some 41-year-old guy standing in front of a PowerPoint presentation using PBS cartoons from 10 years ago that you're like, I'm not for, come on. They were able to connect in ways that mattered to each other. So peers are mentoring each other at this point. And now they know they can go to each other. They can be like, do you remember that one thing that you have to do with the thing when it goes red? Yeah, I remember that. Okay. Oh, great. Thanks. So, awesome. All of these experiments I kept track of using what's called the lean canvas. You remember I showed you a big canvas before that was like all your assumptions in boxes. There's a whole methodology based around this for tracking your experiments. So I've got the key objectives. Ignore this part up top. Key objectives, what is it I'm trying to prove? What experiments are in my queue? What am I working on now? Was it validated or not? Not every experiment that I did was validated. Those red ones are like, whoa, I went way off left field and I am not going to try that again. It doesn't work. Why waste my time? Life is too short to build things that nobody wants. So, solutions are iterating nicely. What's next? Here's my board that I was looking at. Some of my assumptions actually panned out. Yeah, sitting with a buddy works. Fast info articles can work, but they need a little support. Some things didn't work. Project managers, for example, do not care at all about this. So, okay. Some of the next experiments that are coming up. This is not a complete process yet. It is a prototype. So, evaluating. How do student trainers fairly and consistently evaluate their peers as they train? There is a job thing on the line, right? If you can show that you're good at these skills, then you go into the queue for being promoted to the next level. If the student trainers are the ones who are evaluating performance, how do we make sure that they're using the same criteria, they're adhering to that, and that it's fair? So that's something we got to test to make sure that it works. Also, how sustainable is this going to be? There's nothing worse than pouring a ton of energy into a beautiful project that then gets put in a binder and locked on a shelf and never seen again. So this training has to become part of the student-employee experience. It can't be the first thing that you do. It's got to be the thing you keep doing. So finding out sustainability is going to be a component. To do the evaluation, I think we're actually onto something. I helped develop what's called a rubric. So every one of those Canvas lessons has a rubric associated with it with the key concepts. And as the students go through, the mentoring student can say, okay, did you fail at that? Do you need to work at it? Did you do it well? Or are you so good at it that you can teach other people? So there are assumptions about all of those ideas, and I'll be happy to talk about that later, but I recognize that we've got about 15 minutes, which is great. Some caveats. This process was built for computer support services. If I were to try and take this training prototype and just plunk it into another department, that's kind of the same as saying that as like going from the wheel to the car, right? It won't have iterated to solve the problems that are really in the other department. So for bookstore, for example, you might go through some process like this, but you won't come out with the same product. Same thing, right? As Calvin and Hobbes. Everybody knows, like he knows that everybody he knows needs a kick in the butt, but you can't sell it. You've got to go through the process, not the product. It's like security. Sorry about that. This is my contact information. Technical training consultant. Call me on the phone. Send me an email if you want to. I'm going to point you to my Blogspot page because I have videos that I posted over the course of this prototyping process. So I've got about 4 or 5 videos that go back to about September. Every time I had a meeting with the CSS, with Al, or with some of his students while they were doing the building, I would come back and just like ramble for 5 minutes and show you what the differences were and how things grew. That's a good place to keep up with this. Let me show you real quick what the prototype that I'm envisioning looks like. And again, it's a prototype, so it's not finished. It's a binder, so I just totally disparaged binders, saying they get put up on shelves and never used. This is a binder that you use, okay? So so this is a binder that is full of these sheets, right? It's got these training Canvas sheets. And your job as a student employee, when you walk in the door, is you go and you grab your binder and you take it to your desk. At some point, your supervisor is going to direct another student toward you. Some student who's like really good at making ACD change orders, for example, whatever that is. So, hey, Jenna, you really know how to do ACD change orders. Why don't you go and teach this gentleman right next to you how to do that? So you would go and sit down next to him. You would have this at-a-glance training that shows you the materials and the evaluations and the, all the stuff that he would do to learn how to do this, and you walk him through the training. When he gets done, he takes it out of his little pocket and he puts it into the binder. So he actually puts it on the rings. The lessons that are on the rings are things that you know how to do. Okay? This serves a couple of really nice points. First, if I'm your supervisor, I can just come and grab your binder and say, okay, what do you know how to do? You know how to do this? You know how to do that? Great. I see you're advancing as an employee. Awesome job. The other thing that this does for you is that if you forget how to do a thing, It's right here. You don't have to go digging into Fast Info or wherever to go find the how-tos. You can just go to it, and you get the benefit of that same at-a-glance thing too. You remember doing the tasks. You remember using these materials. The rest of your brain activates. This is the neuropsychology behind training, and it's what I know how to do. So now you have a faster resource to get back up to speed on something you haven't done in a while, for example. So if you're on the phone, the person on the phone isn't listening to you type and doing keywords and going, oh my God, where's the right article? I can't find it in these 5,000 returns. Instead, it's just like, let me see how to do that. Yeah, I know what to do. Okay, let's do it. So it supports you as you go, and I think this is part of that sustainability solve that I'm working for. I'm not advocating that we have a campus full of binders, but maybe. I don't know, a department full of binders probably wouldn't hurt until we can come up with a system that lives up to these needs. The other thing that this has in it is each one of these has the evaluation rubric up at the top: failed, needs work, performed well, could teach others. If I ever need to find somebody who can teach, like let's say Jenna moves on, but she's taught you so well, or you picked it up so well, that you can teach other people, and maybe you're having an issue with it, I could just go to the binders and try and find somebody who's got could teach others. Just be like, you go teach her, okay? Now you're starting to network within your workplace. And when there's 40 or 50 student employees, you don't want to be surrounded by strangers all day. You want to be surrounded by people you can depend on and work with. And then you can start taking all those could teach others and whatever, turn it into an annual performance review or something like that. Now we know who to promote into USC 2 from a USC 1. I just see this as being like a really nice spinny cog. And if I tried to like build this full thing out of my brain from step 1, you would all be looking at me cross-eyed and going like, I don't believe you, and who are you, and how could you possibly know? But now you're all nodding at me, and you're going like, I'm writing down your number, and I'm going to give you a call because I'm interested in what you're doing here, you strange man. So, again, it's a prototype. We might develop this into something electronic or something else. Don't know. What do you think? I got a couple minutes. That's my bit.
When the cloud would be nice to repository.
What's that?
Putting all those documents on the cloud.
Mm-hmm.
Nice. Could follow you around.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, if there's some way that it's always accessible, that's the point, is that it's accessible. Not that it exists, but that you can get to it. So yeah, maybe there's a way to put it on the cloud. I don't know. What else? What do you think? You're all ruminating, right? You're like, I can't think about that right now. I've got an idea. Huh?
So I noticed this is based heavily on the lean,
Mm-hmm.
and would it be beneficial to take the lean courses and to really learn the whole lean process thoroughly, or is this something that can be applied and interpreted, put to your own department as is, or at least as well as being developed, as opposed to like taking a whole course in lean first and then taking from that?
I don't know that you need to take a whole course in lean, and that's actually a very lean answer, right? Why take the entire course if it doesn't turn out to be the thing that you want? Right. I would say that based on my experience with what happened there? There it is. With using this kind of documentation for the Canvas documentation, right? Using that with Al, he was able to really quickly just latch on to, okay, this is how it works. I think what you do need is somebody who can do the tracking of the experiment very well. And I can point you to a couple of resources. There we go. Somebody who knows how to use this kind of chart to track, I can point you to some resources on that. As I say, I was an entrepreneur, so I dug into this stuff pretty heavily, and it just kind of came out for me. It doesn't make sense, really, if you don't get it. So one of the things that I'm interested in as a technical training consultant who's interested in student outcomes and success is how do I, if this is interesting enough for people to want to use it, how do I support you using it well? So maybe a course at EOD might be adopting the lean method toward building training for student employees. I mean, you don't have to get the lean startup by Eric Ries and business model construction by some guy with a really crazy Norwegian name. You just need to know, like, If what I just told you makes enough sense, you probably don't need a class. You probably just need like 5 minutes of sitting down and being like, okay, how do I make this work for me? And then we iterate a version for you, and it works. Other questions? Thoughts? Can you see how this, by the way, yeah?
Do you find, like, your experiment 0, the measuring of commitment, do you find that's a good place to start?
Yes. And that's interesting. I'm glad you brought that up. Yes, absolutely. I think commitment is the first thing you should measure, and it should be in the form of time and energy. Every one of those experiments, this is a sneaky thing, so I'm glad you brought that out. Every one of those experiments involved me asking somebody to do more work. So it's not just come to a room and talk. Now it's come to a room and talk and bring something and explain it to me. And now it's come to a room, talk, bring something and explain to me, and then go back to your office and do homework. And now it's go recruit some other people and then bring them in. Every step of the way required more and more commitment of resources, time, energy, talent, patience, organization. And that's how, that was one of my criteria for success. If at any point somebody said, man, this is just getting to be too much and I don't want to do it, okay. The way that I work is I never push. If it's good enough, then it'll speak for itself. And if it really addresses a problem, then I won't have to push. You're going to be pulling me to come to where you want to be. So, yeah, commitment is the first thing that I measure, and it comes in time and talent. Other questions? Escalate it up. Keep asking for more and more and more, because I'm lazy.
So where do you stop? Like, how do you know that this iteration is good enough?
You keep going back and asking the question, okay, did this solve your problem? And if you look at the lean process, or there's a website called Wise Hunch that has really good structure on how to build problem and solution interviews, you're always coming back to the question, did this solve the hurt? And if the answer is yes, then you're done. And if the answer is yes, but now I have this new hurt, then you start talking about, okay, well, what features would help solve that new hurt? But you don't try to like fully embrace every possible feature, and that way you also avoid feature creep, right? By sticking with just the problem that was specified. Most features I find are introduced, or feature requests are introduced because somebody envisioned a potential problem scenario and they want to get out in front of it, but it's not real. And so a bunch of people end up doing a lot of work and getting distracted from the real problem that they have to fix a fake problem that they might think maybe would happen someday and we could get out in front of it and be really proactive, but then you don't get anything done. Does that answer your question? Others? How am I doing on time?
You're about 4 minutes.
Sweet. Okay, well, again, my name is Cameron Goebel. I'll put up my contact information. Again, I'm with EOD. My job is to go around to every department and say, hey, how can I help you make things happen better? So please give me a call. Let me know what's going on. I'm glad that you showed up from the bookstore. I knew that there was a little tickle of information coming out of there, so maybe we can make a contact. It's a pleasure working for you today. Thank you for showing up.